If we have enough time, then I will certainly look at some models of distribution, simple models that should help you understand distribution. Uh, one of your drawbacks right now, although you can get to that whenever you want to, is you don't know share allocations, and you don't have the data in front of you. So male gets X, husband gets X, and wife gets this. If you don't have that, it's not easy for you to work out. But then once you have it, and then you memorize it, then you start working with it, and then it just becomes part of your working program. So like when you guys did anatomy, the tough part was to first learn all the bones of the body, right? And now you've forgotten them, and yet you remember them. So if I have to put you on the spot and ask you something, it might take you a while before you get it. But in your workflow, as you're working with the human body, it just falls into place. So the same with when a lawyer or a mufti, when he works with the laws of testation, then he too has these things at the back of his mind. And much like I would think in other professions, he also knows that in this particular condition, you would normally give that, except if that happens. So you have these exclusionary conditions. And these exclusionary conditions apply a great deal here, and we spoke about them yesterday. And the word we use was al-man', al-mani' and habs, or hajb, from the word hijab. That which blocks, that which prevents, and that which blocks. So we gave you the example of that which blocks is ikhtilafuddin. If two people are of a different faith, then that is hijab, it's hajb. It's not just a mani'. So it's because it's permanent unless they change their faith. So these are some of the things you have to know before you can get into the mechanicals of it. We'll try. But for these 2 or 3 days that we've been talking about this particular area, I want you to focus on the basic assumptions upon which this entire structure that we call ilmul mirath is structured. Now, one of the unfortunate and strange things about the study of ilmul mirath for us as scholars is we were not taught the basic assumptions. We go straight into it, and you get into Kitabul Fara'id, the books on inheritance, and it just. So when you're 10 years later, 20 years later, when you're asked a question, why does Islam give man twice what it gives a woman? It's very difficult for you to answer that because you haven't been trained that way. But if you live in a contested environment or a hostile environment, then every time you have an open house and you think you're going to get away with your pakoras and your baklava, somebody's going to throw you a question about why do men and women why are they treated in different ways? Why is there this discrimination? And you'd be surprised. People might not know who the Prophet of Allah is, but they know about this particular element of Islam. So it forces us in this particular context, which is America or the West, to kind of ramp up on these things to get to know them. That's the one. And because that is the case, it also helps us to actually, when you study the structures so that you can give someone a ruling. You come to us and says, my brother died, what do I do in that case? Then you're in the mechanics of it. You don't get a chance to hover. You can't look, because you're looking at the trees, you don't get a chance to look at the forest. And nobody has a complete understanding of any subject unless he can focus on both. You have to know the trees and also know the forest. Because ultimately that single tree is connected to the tree next to it. It might not seem that way because they're all independent. But in terms of the root structure, in terms of the irrigation, in terms of the nutrients, they're all dependent on each other. And that's something that doctors come to learn as well, that you can't just treat the human body. The environment is going to have an impact on it. All of those things matter. And in years gone by, the focus was exclusively on the human body, without much regard for the environment. And now suddenly you realize, no, you have to blend this. If you don't cure the environment, you're just going to be dealing with symptoms and not causes. So the same is true here, that you have to look up, but get onto one of those drones and then see things and you say, now it makes sense. For example, let me start with this. Let me start with the one in the middle here. In Islam, the aim is to provide an equitable distribution of the estate. To be fair, not an equal distribution of the estate. Being fair and being equal is not the same. When you're being equal, then you're only looking at 2 or 3 or 5 people. When you're looking at, when you're distributing equitably, you're looking at the circumstances as well. See the difference? You're looking at their circumstances as well. So you have to make that your point of departure. If you have to explain this to someone, what is it that sets Islamic laws of succession separate from the non-Islamic? The number one is that it is equitable, not equal. Don't fall into the trap of trying to prove that Islam treats men and women equally. You're going to fail. If you do that, you're going to lose that argument from the very outset. You say that Islam attempts to provide an equitable distribution of the estate. And because it does that, therefore everything is focused on that. The other is, one of the basic assumptions of this is that it is meant to govern non-statal conditions. You can fill that up. And please write down the whole thing because I might forget, so I want you to remember it. Non-statal conditions. As human beings, we've moved on. Politically speaking, human society in the 21st century is different from political society in the 20th century, is different, and so on. As you go further back, you find our political structures have changed. And those political structures are what determine our legal systems. If you don't have a political structure, your legal structure cannot work. Basic assumption or basic premise: if you don't have a political structure, your legal structure cannot work. Or if it does work, it works ineffectively or inadequately. So for instance, Islamic law, for instance. You want to apply it, you want your estate distributed according to Islamic law in America, but you don't have the political structure. There is a political structure, except that you don't own it. It's not your political structure. There is a political structure in place, and that political structure provides its own legal system. You have to try and fit your requirements within that system. When we talk about banking also, and people have so many criticisms against banking, understand this. It's not the law that determines it, it's the politics that determines it. Once you have the political structure, within that structure you have the law. And that law is then governs everything in society. If you want to bring in a new legal system, you want to bring in a new institution, it must fit into that system. So your whatever you try to do within the system will be inadequate. All right? So it's in Islam, it goes back to 7th century Arabia, where there was no central government. You can't think about it. I don't know if you can imagine a society where there is no central government, where your legislature determines what the laws are, and then you have the judiciary applying those laws, and you have an entire legal edifice, attorneys, lawyers, judges, and if you're outside the United States, magistrates. That's a whole legal structure. 7th century Arabia didn't have that. Until the time of Omar, I think there were no prisons so we take these things for granted. See that you have a legal system, you must put them in jail. Coming back to the other criticism against Islam, that the way in which it deals with felons who are guilty of theft, you cut their hand off. Ask yourself, what option do you have if you don't have a prison system? What options do you have? What happens if your entire economy is based on subsistence? In other words, hand-to-mouth living. What you earn, you eat, and Allah knows what's going to happen to you tomorrow. So you're going to have a prison system, and you're going to imprison someone, and you're going to feed him 2 meals or 3 meals a day. How is that going to work? You see? So you have to go back in time to make sense of this. So this is what is meant by, it is meant to govern under non-state conditions. If you're living in a village, then you have a particular structure there. And even in some countries today, village rule is village rule. Central government doesn't have the same impact on it. Central government tries. If you take the northwest frontier, that's a classic place. You could spend an entire lifetime studying the life of the people in that area. They're part of Pakistan, and they're not part of Pakistan. It's because they have autonomy, because they have their own culture, they have their own rules, they have their own laws. And the interesting thing about their laws is, in the frontier area, you have 3 laws operating. You have Islamic law, Pakistani law, and tribal law. So this system here that Allah has given us, it has to operate within that structure. In 7th century Arabia, you had Islamic law, and then you had tribal law. So that's the other thing that it's meant to govern non-state conditions. And then we go to, these things are connected to human rights, and therefore you come back to this. In Islam you have, I don't have it in its proper order, because I'll tell you what happened. I forgot my book at home. Somebody's bringing it now. So I'm kind of doing this from memory. I said we have equitable distribution, not equal. It's meant for societies that are not centralized. And there's a separation of a state. You must pay careful attention to this, because whatever I tell you here applies not just to inheritance, it also applies to marriage and things like that. It's a broad area. So this particular separation of a state means that which belongs to the wife does not belong to the husband, and vice versa. That's separation of estates. We spoke about that yesterday. And this idea of what is the term they use in Western law? Where estates come together. You have a single estate. What's it called? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about, right? In a marital household, you have it'll come. It's right there. It's actually a Christian idea. In Christianity, when 2 parties are wedded together in marriage, they become one. Get it? They become one. This is why divorce is unacceptable within at least Catholic Christianity, traditional Catholic Christianity, because it's the fusion of both souls. Until, come on, movies, you heard this one. Until what happens? Death do us part. Divorce cannot part you. So out of that grows the idea that if our souls are joined together, our properties are also joined together. So you see how you get influenced by a society in which you live? And that obviously becomes the basis for secular law as well. Secular law is generally secular and rational. In other words, it's not based on traditional values. It's just something that is rational and that is transparent and that can be explained. But there are some things in secular law that cannot be explained because they're remnants of the society upon which it is built, like in Christianity. So this coming together of this property, I can't get the term, community of property. That's the term. Community of property, commune, coming together. Community of property is a relic of Christianity, which secular law and then becomes secularized, and the legal system is based on that. That might not be the case any longer in the United States, but certainly is the case in a place like England, for instance. So you have married in community of property. Do we have it here? Married out of community of property? No? No, we don't know. So in order to modify that, you have property that was brought into the marital household, and then whatever was added on later, that is treated separately. So these were modifications that Christian Western society had to in order to accommodate its own traditional legacy, right? In Islam, we don't have that. States are strictly separated. I want you to remember that a minute, because in marriage, that law doesn't apply. So in Islam, if a woman is physically mature, and she has mental capacity, in Islam we do take into consideration, in most things physical maturity is important, is the only criterion. But in matters of commerce, then mental capacity also counts. So if she wants to buy a house or start up a business, for instance, nothing stops her from doing that. If she wants to start up a business, nothing stops her from doing that, from buying and selling. And obviously she's going to pocket all the profits and suffer the losses like any other independent business person. And of course, the man, obviously, he can do the same thing. So you understand that Islam recognizes that. And then on the other hand, if she wants to get married, she cannot. So she can buy and sell the Empire State Building, but she cannot marry on her own. I'm going to explain this now. All right? So according to Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, a woman cannot marry without the authority and the permission of the wali. Not wakil, wali. You don't hear of the word wali so much in your community because it is Hanafi. The Hanafis is the only school that allows a woman to marry herself. There are some conditions. You understand the slight contradiction here. So this young woman, and all schools agree that she can be young as long as she has capacity to engage in commerce. She can open up shop, no problem. But she cannot marry herself. She must la nikaha illa bi waliyin. La nikaha illa bi waliyin. That's the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says marriages cannot be performed except with the blessing, the presence, the authority of the wali. You get it? According to Imam Abu Hanifa, she can. If she especially, especially if she has, if she is mature, then certainly she can. If she is less than mature, then she must, as long as she is marrying somebody, I don't know if you've heard this word kufu. Have you heard of this word kufu? No. Kufu means compatibility, basically. As long as she's marrying somebody who is compatible and not the milkman, then that marriage is acceptable. To understand this, you have to go back to what is called the principles of fiqh. And if I spend 2 minutes explaining that to you, probably take more than 2 minutes, then you will understand why Hanafis are almost always on the one end of the spectrum and everybody else is on the other end. For Hanafis, the supreme law is the Quran. And there are 2 verses in the Quran that categorically allow a woman to marry herself or to have control over herself. But the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the Hanbalis also give equal recognition to what did I just read out to you now? The hadith. That gives the Hanafis a bad reputation of the school that does what? Rejects hadith. And none of that is true. They simply says, we accept hadith as long as in terms of its quality, it is equal to the Quran. By quality means the number of people that have narrated it. If you have a large number of people who have narrated a hadith, it reaches a particular level. It's called mutawatir. Tawatur se aa raha. You heard that word? Tawatur se aa raha? Ya jamme ghafir ka qawl hai. That's what it is. It's unlikely, extremely unlikely that more than 4 people can concoct an idea. You understand? 1 person lies, yes. 2 people lie, yes. 3 people lie, yes. 4, 5, 10 people getting together. It's very hard to control that kind of lie. A lie is very hard to control, by the way. Don't do it. Truth is easy. It has just one face to it. So that was the thinking of Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa always stands on one side because he says the Quran is the ultimate authority and we accept hadith except if it reaches that level. This hadith that we spoke about, la nikaha illa bi waliyin, it does not reach that level. So he says, I can't do that. He says, in that case, the Quran is the ultimate rule. So whenever you see that Hanafis are going in one direction and the Shafis and everyone else is going in that direction, understand that it's not that the Hanafis reject the hadith, they just don't think it has the qualitative value to bring it up there. Because that is the supreme authority. For it to come there, and you have to actually modify it. Because I don't remember the hadith, the verse of the Quran. It clearly empowers the woman to deal with her business as she sees fit. And he says, Abu Hanifa, I cannot shift that if it does not have the same kind of authority. So you get what I'm saying so far. Almost every Muslim country today follows Hanafi law in this particular matter. Almost every Muslim country. Egypt, I know for one, as the fatwa of Egypt is based on Hanafi law. Because, you're not living in tribal societies anymore. Understand that Rasulullah's hadith makes a lot of sense in a tribal society. The problems you have for women in particular in tribal societies. It is sad, tragic. So you need that kind of support. But here you have somebody who is a divorcee, for instance. She's already had one life, and she still needs a wali. She is the CEO of a big company. She can, she manages hundreds of people. She can't deal with a marital condition. So that's why even the Shafi'i schools, where Shafi'i school is predominant, they have also modified this to go along with the Hanafi law that you don't need a wali, you might need a wakil, which is like an attorney who would represent you in a marriage. Of course, you would set the parameters of the marriage, and then then the marriage would be performed. So that's important to understand when we come back here, that a female, in terms of the estate, or in terms of her own well-being, yes, the other thing you must understand about how Islam treats a female, in terms of her well-being, physical, mental, and financial. I'm talking about a woman who is a multi-millionaire. All three of these things are never her responsibility. She's got this big load of cash here, load of cash. But her physical, mental, and financial well-being is never her responsibility. Despite this wealth here, it's always either her father, her grandfather, her son, her brother, her uncle. Well, yes, sorry, I'm so sorry. The husband, yes. The husband as well. There was this glow in his face. He was smiling. Rami.
So when you talk about the methodologies, is there a mechanism to take into account like risk averseness and the cost of being wrong? So for example, with things like riba and Islamic finance, you'll find that you can reach a certain conclusion, but if you're wrong about it, right, then you're potentially in a like kabair. I would imagine with marriage there's the same thing. So with these methodologies, does that come into account, or it's simply this is how we approach it? And
by methodology you mean usul?
Yeah, like what you were just talking about with marriage and OLE, right? Because the cost of being wrong about it is potentially more severe than something trivial.
If she makes the wrong decision.
If you say that you can get married without a wali,
yeah,
and it turns out that that's the wrong conclusion, right? That's different from something trivial, where you say this is the conclusion.
But that would apply even in the case where there is a wali. It's not like a wali sanctioned marriage is talaq free, for instance. Isn't that the case? I mean, all kinds of people are engaged in broken marriages or in disrupted marriages. So unless we can do a statistical analysis and says, look, there were 1,000 marriages that broke up, and 90% of those marriages were because of not. That would be a very nice, interesting study to engage in. But I don't know of one like that. Oh.
The cost, I guess what I'm trying to say is the cost of being wrong on some of these issues is much higher. And so is there something in the legal...
Not to my knowledge, okay. No.
I wanted to ask you about prenuptial contracts with the financial issues of a marriage.
Okay, let me answer that. Prenuptial contracts are valid. They're very important. They're very important. In fact, the scholars consider it so important that they have little phrases which don't come to mind right now. This says the woman calls the shots before the marriage. The man calls the shots after the marriage. So make certain that you call the right shots. Including what? I don't want to live in Tennessee. Marriage on condition that I live in Michigan. Okay, no problem. I don't want you to take another wife. I don't want you to take another wife. If you take another wife, you empower me to give the divorce. It's called talaq tafweed. Inshallah, if you have the time at some other moment in the future, we could do a seminar of two days or so just on marriage, because it's also complex. And especially in modern times, we have varieties of marriage now, very interesting varieties, right? So I'll just give you a quick. So you can add those conditions. Those are preconditions of prenuptial contracts. You can put that in there. You can put that. You have to allow me to finish my studies. You have to allow me to. I've seen that in contract. You have to allow me to finish my studies. You have to allow me to finish. You have to allow me to be financially independent. So all of those things. The basic rule that fuqaha give: call every shot you want to before the marriage, because after the marriage, doors are closed.
So prenuptials can have unrealistic, or I would say non-Sharia things, like, because my understanding is, so when you get married, the women's responsibility, financial well-being, all that falls on the husband. So at the time of marriage, I say, okay, you have your own business, I have my own business. I'm not financially responsible for you. Can you have even those kind of prenuptials?
Absolutely, and then here's something to make you smile. You can respond and says, well, now that you're an independent financial person, you can share in the household cost as well, because it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways. I mean, if you want that kind of financial independence, then certainly you're going to have to make a contribution in the household. So that's something you can certainly work out before the marriage. After the marriage, then all the laws of the marriage apply. Which ones haven't we done yet? So this is the female's control capacity, separation of estates. So like we said, a female is independent but in custody. So she will, her affairs will always be determined by son, husband, father, and so on. And you says, but and Saudi Arabia has just changed the rule now. The travel rule, they've changed that. Again, that's coming from 7th century Arabia to the 21st century, and it's because life has changed. Life has changed. I've lived in Saudi Arabia for many years. I don't like sharing this, especially not on YouTube, so I'm not going to say this. You can ask me privately. But it's not favorable to women, even in the holy house areas, in terms of moving around. I'll share one example with you. When we first got to Saudi Arabia from South Africa, we don't cover our faces, and so we used to walk around like that. And then one day, the guy who was selling milk, he stopped me and he says, "You know what? Tell your wife to cover her face." I said, "Oh, okay." In other words, she was being harassed by men. You see, the two things: they look at your face and they're obviously attracted to you, and they also know that you're an outlier, you don't belong, so you're an easy prey. See that? You're not connected to the community. Otherwise, I mean, that's his daughter. How can you do that? You're going to get it. So that, and she covered herself. She was fine. And she was fine. She never had a problem. She never told me about the problems. After I told her what the man said, she said, "Yeah, I think I should, because this is what's happening to me." So the idea of custody is it's not there to manipulate the female. It's there to protect her. And it's not a protection that she doesn't need. It's really a protection that is vital to her, especially the further back you go. There's some terrible things that have happened, even in my lifetime. I mean, women have been just kidnapped, and there's this doctor brother who he came as far as I know, 27 years he came every year to look for his wife. Walking from the hotel to the haram. He stopped, grabbed her, gone. Gone. So when my kids, now it's changed, when my kids used to go, I used to give them strict instructions. When you get off that plane, you make sure you cover your faces entirely. You cover your faces. So that was a hostile environment. So this custody factor is there because there's no central government, you don't have a policing authority, all of those things. And as society develops, then your morals start dropping, values start dropping, and all of these sins start increasing, and life becomes more intolerable for women, see? So these are the basic assumptions upon which the laws of Islamic inheritance are based. And if you put that into place, then you would understand that it is really equitable, not equal. That you're taking into account, multiple factors. Any questions before I take it off? Saudi Arabia now allows women to travel. Yes, it does. It now has a driving policy. You can drive alone, that's right. But now you can also travel alone. And so these are some of because of the changes that have taken place, and we hope they're moving in the right direction. I don't know if they are. There is no consensus. You have to play it by, depending on where the person is going to. I think even the most independent female will understand that there are places in the world where you have to be careful where you go and what you do and things like that. It's. My wife was here a few months ago, and she traveled the entire United States alone. She had no problem. And she was born and raised in South Africa, and after Maghrib, everybody stays home. Nobody goes out. Because, circumstances are different. It's an extremely violent country. So you have to apply a different rule there. So, there are two groups that we spoke about previously, and we're stumbling over them. So it's easy to remember them. I gave them a new name also. We call them the Furudis and the Asabis. A Furudi is one whose share is mentioned in the Quran, and an Asabi is one whose share is not mentioned in the Quran. Basic assumption. So once you know that, okay, we can move from there. You got that? There are some Furudis, Asabis generally inherit, but some Asabis don't. Here are the Asabis who will always inherit. So these Furudis will always inherit under all circumstances. The son, the daughter, the father, the mother, the wife, and the husband. So there are no circumstances under which these 6 categories will not inherit. They will always inherit. All the other Furudis, they might be subject to those 2 terms I told you about, mana and hajab. They could be blocked because somebody else is standing in line. So, but these people they are they are closest to the deceased, and therefore they're given that particular preference. So that's who they are.
Even if they are not of Islam, they still.
No. Not being a part of Islam, then those 2 things. That's a good question. No, then they denied. You understand? He asked, does this apply to people does this go across the faith or not? No, it doesn't go across the faith. So although the books don't mention that, that's a good point. If I ever have the time to write on this, I might add it to there, that it's not a total entitlement. It's subject to them being Muslim.
So yesterday you had mentioned that the son is part of the asabi category, not the furud.
The son is part, yes, he is, but he is, first let me see if I got it right. Yeah, he is, if you look at the text, he is mentioned as by exclusion, that once they get that, then he gets left. He's always given something. That's a good question also. So maybe we should put him also not in the book, see? We got some smart people here, man. So maybe we should put him here. He is asabi, but he always inherits, because the verses are structured such that they always leave him something. And he is, in the game of chess, I mean, if you people, those who think it's halal firstly, and those who like playing it, the queen is the most important piece, right? So this is the queen of the estate. He's always going to be, he can move in multiple directions. He's got huge advantages over everyone else. The daughter, not so much. Then you have this category called the Dhawil Arham. This is your maternal family. Not your mother's sister so much as your mother's sister's brother, your khal. Does he inherit? Who else is there? Your maternal aunt. So this is Zawil Arham. Your daughter's son, your aunt's, your maternal uncle from in marriage. Yeah. Your daughter's son, your grandson from your daughter's side. So remember, we said that this is there's a priority list you follow, right? You start with the furudis, then you go to the asabis, and then you go back again, and so on until there's nothing left. What happens if there's an X amount left? Where does that go? So after you have distributed everything, you still have 100,000 left. So according to the Malikis and the Shafi'is, it goes to the Baytul Mal. It goes to the Baytul Mal. That's a different question. See, that's trying to fit in a non-American legal framework within a legal. You see the challenge you face now. Interesting question. But according to Abu Hanifa and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they should inherit. And they use, remember Abu Hanifa, very, very Quran inclined. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى. How does the verse go? وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى مِنْ بَعْضٍ. So, and included in this are the people of the Rahim. Rahim actually means, like I told you, the womb. So these are your uterine family. It says, yeah, even amongst them there is a pecking order. They are the Shafi'i and Malika of the opinion that is talking about people who fall into these categories, not into the outsiders. So they exclude them. And I think it is upon this that this is not just the Hanafi and Hanbali law, it's also the Shia law. So in Shia law also the Zawil Arham have a share to inherit. Then we come to a very interesting category, the hermaphrodite. Somebody who's born both organs, or we call them khuntha mushkil. And the word mushkil is used because it's not easy to determine who this is. There's an interesting story here. In pre-Islamic times, the family came to the chief and they says, we've got this child whose father has died and we are distributing his inheritance. We don't know what to make of the child. He said, what do you mean? He says, well, this child has got both organs. So he had a sleepless night. He didn't know how to answer that. Well, obviously they didn't have that experience, it was a rarity for them. So there was a maid in the house, a slave girl, and she said, why are you so restless? He says, well, I've got this problem that I have to solve. How do I distribute to this hermaphrodite who has both organs? She said, easy. Just determine where the urine is coming out of. He says, determine where the urine is coming out of. And that becomes part of Islamic law itself. That becomes part of Islamic law. Now, as we go along, I'm sure some of you have thought about how areas of the laws of inheritance might be subject to modification. So given our advances in science and so on, there are more precise ways of determining someone's sex. You don't have to look at where the urine comes out of. And that's something we have to look at. Because the reason I shared the story with you is because the first rule itself was based on an Arab tradition, revelation, say. So if that rule was good enough at that time, surely another rule can now be used in our circumstances. So this is the more ways in which Muslim scholars should be looking at the law. And hopefully they do that. Then we have this category of pregnancy. If pregnancy exists, then and it's determined that this is a viable pregnancy, whatever means they use for that, because we're caught up in this whole debate within this country, both a culture debate. I don't know if it's too much of a debate in the medical field about when is life viable. When is the fetus a viable entity? Massive debate that goes on here. In Islam, it's 100 days, and if the child is viable and the child and delivery takes place complete, then that child inherits. Even if the child dies after delivery, because then a whole new set of rules pertaining to the estate comes into play. So if the husband dies and the wife is pregnant and pregnancy has been determined in whatever form, and then you wait for this woman to go into labor, and then she delivers, and the baby separates from the body, and the scholars would say she must give sarha wahida. The child must be able to scream one, that kind of thing, to show that there's life. Then that child is considered a viable person, and that child will then inherit, even if the child dies. Any questions there? Okay. Brothers, sister, the mother who gave birth, because now the child is deceased. So if the child dies and the mother is alive, then the first point is she is entitled to how much? No, we're not talking about anyone else there yet. If the mother, she's entitled to 1/3. She gets 1/3. If there is another party, then the 1/3 is cut into 1/6, and so on. Because if the child has brothers and sisters and so on, so the 1/3 is split, and so that is what is meant by mani' and hajib. These two terms, they're very important, because on the one hand you have these fixed amounts or fixed percentages or fractions, and on the other, those fractions are modified depending on who else is inheriting in that particular family. So the Quran gives you the basic framework that tells you if X happens, then that 1/4 becomes 1/8, or the half becomes a quarter, and so on. You get it? What happens if there's another issue that is called awl, al-awl. So in if I can still recall, we have, when you have your fractions, you have your numerator on the top, right? And then the denominator at the bottom. Is that right? Am I remembering this correctly? You never know. So what happens if the number of shareholders becomes such that that the numbers can no longer hold, because they're going to get exhausted? Then you have to increase the denominator. So if the cake, according to the Quranic tradition, was split, it would have been split into, say, 12 pieces. You're going to have to cut it into 16 pieces. Because you have others who have not, who have the right to, but how do you accommodate them? You increase the denominator. That's called awl. Do you understand what I'm saying or not? It doesn't happen too often, but it might. That way, where the family is big, and there are 7, 8, 9, 10 people who fall into various categories, and they all have equal rights to this. Everyone's share gets reduced. So even that son that mother who was getting, say, 1/6 will probably get 1/7 or something like that, in order to accommodate everyone. Coming back to the basic idea which I had previously, in Islam, the objective is an equitable distribution. Certainly there's a pecking order. Those who belong to this category here will be given priority, but even their shares will be compromised in order to accommodate everyone, which I think is perhaps one of the most fair-minded ways to approach the distribution of anything. To the extent that if you are obviously when we distribute estates now, we go to the attorney, we make an appointment on Monday morning, and then the heirs will gather there and so on. But if you're living in 7th century Arabia, 8th century Arabia, when you're distributing, everybody lives in the same area, and now you're going to talk about he gets that, he gets that. Then there are extended family members who are looking on. They're not going to get anything. But Islam encourages the heirs to give them something. Give them something, so that everybody can share in this, and all of this obviously accrues to the deceased, that this is going to be to his benefit or her benefit. So that's a very small but remarkable element of the distribution process. For everyone. For everyone. People who are, unless there's a section in Islamic law, now that you brought it up, where someone is extremely wealthy. So let's just say you have 5 brothers. He has him and 5 brothers. So they're a family of 6. And 5 of them still live in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever, Egypt. He's moved here. He's done very well for himself, alhamdulillah. And then the estate, this probably happens a lot. The estate is being distributed in the country of origin. So he says, I would rather my share is shared amongst my brothers and sisters. Make dua for me. I'm sure this happens. Because Allah's given me enough on this side, and let them, that is acceptable. Then the estate will be redivided such that instead of the state having 6 brothers, it will now have 5 brothers. His share would then be put into the bowl itself again. Then he has to take he can do that, but then he must take the share. Then he has to say, okay, I have a proxy there, I have a lawyer, and he represents me, and I want my share. And then you give the lawyer the instruction. He says, I want you to give it to the ED Foundation, for instance, or any other foundation, something like that. But that's different. But here you want your brothers and sisters to benefit from it. Your best bet would be to simply leave it in the estate and let the estate distribute it, lest you engage in any kind of favoritism of your own. It might be, and I know this happens quite often, where there's a poor sister living out there and she's not doing very well. And if the family, alhamdulillah, has pulled through with some affection and compassion for each other, then they wouldn't have a problem if the one brother decides to donate all his estate to that particular sister, I would imagine. But these are things that can only be determined on good conscience and a willingness to accommodate, which is not always the case.
I have a question. When you withdraw from your share of the inheritance, it can be before they divide the shares, or it's after when everything is divided?
Yeah, you can do it either time.
Either time?
Although it would be problematic if you do it afterwards. I don't think it would be. I mean, in terms of distribution, if it has been determined that there's 7 heirs and you're getting $70,000 from the estate, you simply say, well, I'd like all the remaining, make it 60, make it easier. I'd like all the remaining heirs to get whatever I'm supposed to get on equal basis. So yeah, you can do that. It might prove problematic if it's a complicated estate. The one thing we found is I alluded to a problem we have in some Muslim countries where families are reluctant to distribute their estate. They're very I wouldn't say prominent, but significant scholar from Turkey who is presently at Duke University, and he writes a great deal about the laws of inheritance. And he says that the laws of inheritance in Islam are one reason why Muslims could not amass the kind of wealth that was needed to create these mega corporate structures. So, for instance, you have the Edison Foundation, or these are massive foundations, because what happens is when you distribute your estate Islamically, then the shares they have to be split. And coming back, connecting what he's saying to the problem we have in some Muslim countries where families are so reluctant to distribute their estate, lest they have to first break it up and then it ends up in the neighbors' coffers. That's the reason why they do that. So they're not. It's not always because they want to be unjust to the female when they engage in these phony marriages. It's because they're afraid of breaking it up, as he pointed out, because breaking up means you no longer have the capacity to compete at that level. Your estate is now, if you had 1,000 acres and it's broken up amongst all your brothers and sisters, how do you compete at a higher level? That's where a waqf helps. But you have to transfer that into your waqf. And you can do the distribution within the waqf while the estate stays on. You have to prepare for your. I can't recall where I read this, but you have to prepare for your demise and the distribution of your estate from the very beginning that you start accumulating wealth. And in Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, or Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, used to sit down almost every day and says, "This is how I want my estate distributed," because your financial well-being keeps changing. It keeps changing. So there's certainly something to be said about the weakness that the breakup brings to a potential that can grow. And so the way to address that would be, in my opinion, I think, to resort to a waqf administration of the estate. You might want to sell out your part of the estate, and then the remaining heirs will then take ownership of it. It's going to become a real problem for many of us seated here today, and it's a good problem as long as you deal with it immediately. You know that if I die, I've got 3 sons, I die, I have 4 grandsons. What happens in daughters and so on? What happens in that case to what is a viable proposition? You're owning 20 garages, and you don't want to get rid of them, because what you can do with 20 garages in terms of collateral and all the rest of it is far greater than what you can do with a single garage. You know, it gives you that kind of financial oomph that you otherwise wouldn't have. So those are things that we have to consider when we are making these rules that would have an impact on people's financial viability.
I have a question here, kind of related to what you're saying, but more so, assume that the wife has her own wealth and the husband has his own wealth too, and depending on who passes away first, the distributions are going to be different. So does that mean that they're going to have their separate wasiya or separate waqf, so that the distributions happen according to who passes away first?
Okay, stop right there. Waqf is a different category.
I know, wasiya, I mean to say. A will.
You see, there's the inheritance itself. That's irth. Let's use the Arabic term. You have the mirath, and then you have the waqf, and then you have the wasiya. What we are talking about is the separation of estates applies to all 3. They might be connected in different ways. They might be shuraka, they might be partners, shariks in business, for instance. That would have a different impact on it. Do you want to rephrase the question, or?
Yes, I agree.
I still want to hear it. I thought maybe you want to rephrase it.
No, what I'm trying to say is, does the husband and wife need to have their separate waqfs?
Preferably.
Okay.
They can decide to have their own waqf also, but I don't know. For some people it works, and for others it doesn't.
If they both have assets.
Yeah. So I think it varies from person to person. I would think if you have the ideal situation, if one partner is simply at home, but they both have their names on their properties, problem is solved. Because you know it's the same problem. But if she earned it differently, you earned it differently, maybe Allah forbid nothing happens in the marital household. But keeping your estate separate helps if, God forbid, a divorce takes place. You can't keep it separate entirely, but to the extent possible, keep it separate. So at least you have an amicable separation. But if it gets joined and it grows, then you have serious problems of splitting. There's an issue of zakat also. Shukran for that. Let me take his question.
You gave an example that brother or sisters are in the old country and you are the estate and how it can be distributed. And if you are living here, generally it happens that we say, okay, take my share or distribute among yourself. But what I'm asking that other way around, we are living here. If we are died, how it get
Good
distributed
Good
going
question.
back there, especially if we already have the big share in the estate over there. We already have that. So how it get
No,
distributed?
now you're confused. First question only. Let me.
Yeah, okay.
He's simply asking the reverse is equally
Exactly,
appropriate.
yeah.
You know, it's equally appropriate because I'm living here and I die, and I have a brother in Pakistan. He has a right to that. Obviously, if he falls within the category. When I say category, I mean, you know, these are the preferred heirs. I mean, we have the preferred shareholders in company law. These are your preferred heirs and so on. So he obviously has the right to that, and they get neglected because they are out there. They don't have access to here, and you know, people. We don't have the mindset here to understand, and we should be teaching our children this.
Exactly.
That we should teach our children that our estate should be, it might not be distributed entirely in terms of strictly according to Islamic law because of the situation in which we find ourselves, but we should, to the extent possible, not be unjust to people. And being unjust to people is where a brother or a sister who is outside the country, who doesn't have access to this country, who does, you know, for various reasons, but is an heir, that person should be given his or her heir. It's just fair. That was the first part of your question, right?
I will extend this one.
Okay.
It's a story of every immigrant who came in this country. When you come, you know a lot of things for the family. So if you have the stake already there in the old country, the big part of inheritance you already have there, and if I'm going here, it seems a little bit more contradictory that I will give the share while I already had the big part in that estate which is in the old country.
Which is also true. I mean, if you were fortunate enough to buy some nice real estate in Karachi, say 40 years ago,
Exactly. That's what I'm talking.
you'll be a very rich man today. Well, let's not go there. Let's not go there. Let's just assume, alhamdulillah, we have good people around us, and it exists. It has not been. Well, in that case, you're absolutely right. Your estate is small compared to the potential that estate has. I know this. I mean, the prices have just mushroomed. They've massively gone up. So yes, you have a right to that, but you have to get on the plane, go there, find yourself an attorney, empower that person, and make certain that they protect your rights. That's something that you have to do. Someone else had a question. The important thing about the zakat, about this distribution which we spoke about yesterday, is the zakat is also administered separately. That the zakat for the wife is separate from the zakat for the husband. He has his estate, she has her estate. Okay? So don't go around trying to find a translation of this book called Kitabul Hiyal, wherein you will find that there are ways in which you can avoid paying zakat. Well, there are legal ways. You know, much like we have in American law, you are allowed to avoid taxes, you're not allowed to evade taxes. Right? In the same way, time for that? No. In the same way, in Islamic law, you are allowed to avoid zakat, you're not allowed to evade it. Whether you should avoid it or not is left between, always remember, there's the law, there's your conscience, and then there's Allah. The law will work on the minimal demands. Your conscience should work on the maximum demands. The faqih or the mufti or the qadi cannot impose on you. So if you get married tomorrow and then you have $100,000, you split that 100,000 between yourself and your wife. So you got married today, which is what is the date today? the 26th of April, then you write that down. Come the 25th of April 2023. The 25th of April 2023, you simply swap ownership. You swap ownership, then she hands over to you what is her estate, and you hand over to her, and the clock goes back to zero. You have to wait another year before you can pay zakat. You can do this interminably. Perfectly, I won't say halal, it's acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable. Now you understand why taqwa is so important. Somebody's tried it.
So the husband and wife, they have two accounts. You know, they want to keep it that way, and then so zakat for her will come out of her account balance. Correct.
Yeah, you can go home and tell her that. Yes.
Right. There you go. And then whatever, and it's combined. Obviously, we can both combine it together, or just comes out one. Otherwise, I pay everything. As a single combined account. Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So whatever you decide to do with your property will determine how your zakat will be paid. If you decide to treat it as one, then you understand that you've moved into a legal Islamic instrument, which is called ishtirak or mushtaraka. When you are and so sometimes what they do is say, well, this is not really ishtirak. There's no partnership here. Actually, there is. If you sign a document and you say she is a partner and I'm a partner, that comprises of a partnership, and then the laws of partnership will apply to you on that. So if you want to keep it separate, you keep it separate. If you want to combine it. Each one has its own consequences. All right. We spoke about the blocks. We spoke about. Okay, I think we've covered most of it. Yeah, that covers most of it. Inshallah, tomorrow we should start looking at riba. Yes.
One question, maybe a dumb question. If you have a joint state between husband and wife, and let's say the husband dies first, does the state get divided, or do you have to wait until the wife also dies and then the state gets?
It has to divide immediately, which brings with it also obviously the problems I was sharing with you early on. You know, you're in the property business and you have a portfolio of 25, 30 different properties. That's a difficult one to separate, which is where, you know, turning your partnership into a limited company helps, because then you simply, you know, exactly, the company remains intact and you own 50% of that company. It's I don't know why there are scholars who have reservations about the viability or the legality of the structure of the modern company. But I think it's an excellent way of dealing with this issue, where, you know, when your business becomes cumbersome, it becomes too complicated, you put it into a company, then it is a separate entity. If you die, then your share of that company is now distributed, but the company itself is intact, and they can sell off that shares and things like that, but the entity itself it maintains its viability. Whereas if you don't, then even in American law, you're going to have to split it.
When you start to divide it up, you seriously hamper the viability of that business. even if it's in
even in the case of a company.
Yeah, a company. So company is going to
So-
have shares.
so
Each share is going to have a value. So let's say my company has 1,000 shares. Each share has a value of $100. So I die. Now you're going to take out and distribute. You'll have to sell off the business, in the most part, depending upon how many heirs are there, how much distribution is going to be, or unless all the heirs or few of the heirs are wealthy enough that they can buy out the others.
Well, I see what you're saying, but here's what I'm doing. There's a distinction between the company as a legal entity and the business that it controls. In the partnership, there is no company. You have direct linkage to the business, and your demise has an immediate impact on the business itself. Whereas if you have this buffer, which is a limited company, then the business that it controls need not suffer, see? It might, if it's poorly managed, both in terms of how it's redistributed and also in terms of how the subsequent management takes place. But there's a greater chance of you preserving the business end of this particular structure than there would be if it was a private ownership or a partnership. That's my point. Okay, inshallah tomorrow we'll start again.